Hey superstars, welcome to the Get Rich Without Being a Bitch podcast, and I am your host Vanessa for this journey. We're going to be challenging some stereotypes, shattering glass ceilings, really looking at what it takes to live richly and to design a business that's going to support the life that you really want to be living. I'm going to be sharing lots of tips, tools, and strategies along the way, and I can't wait for you to join me on this journey. Hey superstars, welcome back to another episode of Get Rich Without Being a Bitch. And we are doing a little mini training series here for women-owned law firms. Frankly, if you're not running your own firm, this information is still totally applicable because frankly, what we're sharing here are business principles, right? And business principles really work across the board for many, many different types of businesses. And what I'm sharing here works really well for professional services firms. So we've been talking about that first shift that you have to make, right? Which is that CEO mind shift, like mindset shift, where you move from doing all of the lawyering and all of the things and everything being dependent on you to starting to lead your firm. And vision is really, really important for every business. It's like, where are we actually moving to? What is that vision? And vision for me starts with a couple of things and how I start to really access it. So I want to give you a couple of different tools for how you can actually get to this today. This comes up a lot because the women that we work with are very busy, right? Lawyers by their nature, and especially when you're running your own firm and you're doing your own thing, you tend to have incredibly busy schedules, working all of the hours, playing, catch up on the evenings, the weekends, the weekend that you thought you were going to be free, and all of a sudden you're having to put in the hours on Saturday and Sunday because it's just not enough time in the week. And so when we are that busy, vision can really suffer. Like it really can suffer. It's like we just don't have the space, like the creative space to tap into those deeper desires that we have, right? And give them the time and energy and thoughtfulness that frankly they deserve, that are the foundation of building vision. So one of the places that I like to start is, if you've listened to some of the previous episodes, you'll have heard me talk about this before, it's answering the $1 million question. And the $1 million question, as a reminder, is the question of what are you tolerating? What are you currently tolerating? Because we don't get what we want, we get what we tolerate, right? It's back to those standards. And oftentimes those tolerations block vision. Or another way to say it is when we start to tolerate less of those things, vision becomes more available to us. It's almost like the flip side of those tolerations. And I've heard this from women a lot. They're like, Vanessa, I'm just too busy. There's no time. I'll get to it when. But yet when I can start to ask them the question of, well, start with or just making a list of all the things that you're tolerating, it gives you a really great starting point. Here's the thing. This is your firm. Why would you want to tolerate certain things when it's in your firm? Didn't you leave big law or the firm that you left, right, to build your own firm because there were things you didn't like? Perhaps it was all of the billable hours that you had to do. Perhaps it was the types of clients, right, that you were working with, the cases that weren't quite juicy enough or stimulating enough, right? Perhaps it was the culture that you really didn't appreciate. Like these things, there's a reason that you went into your firm by yourself, and yet what often happens is several years in, or even multi years in, there's a whole host of tolerations, right? So the long hours, the less than ideal clients, we often call them beer clients. If we've got team members, perhaps we're tolerating team members. This is something that comes up in my world a lot, right? The toxic team member. Perhaps you really don't want to be, traveling downtown into the city, 5 days a week, and yet you think you have to. Perhaps you actually want to make the shift to running a virtual firm that you can be location dependent, right? The reason I say this is it's so important to design or frankly redesign your firm so that it works for you and at this stage in your life. Your firm really can deliver just pretty much whatever you want it to, but it needs your direction and your guidance, right? I always think of this as I'm saying that, what comes to mind is I'm always thinking like we've got to direct our firm as if it was a human being and give it very clear instructions and very clear expectations. Like, this is what I want you to do for me, right? And in return, this is what I'm going to do for you. But I don't think we stop to really have that conversation in our heads, and we probably don't get it down on paper. One of the things I like to think about, again, with vision, is thinking about constraints, right? Constraints can be a really great way to shape vision. And what do I mean by constraints? It's like the boundaries that you want to put in place, right? The limitations. Perhaps you don't want a physical office, or you don't want a physical office anymore, right? That's something that we've seen shifting a lot since the pandemic, right? Many firms were in physical locations, and then they've worked out that, there's an awful lot that they can do virtually over Zoom or, with a rented office space for signings, for example, right? Or a shared office space somewhere. So even thinking about those types of constraints, what are the hours that you want to be working? Again, I know this because when I ask the question, not one of my women ever says, I want to be working more hours than I currently am. Not one, right? They've all got a vision for some free time or the non-client facing hours. They'd love to have a Monday, for example, to be working on the business and only start their client facing work, perhaps only doing it 2 days a week, right? That would be a great constraint. I want to move to the place where 2 days a week, or I want to take Friday afternoons off, right? We're closing down the firm at 1:00. What are those other constraints that you want to be putting in place? It could be things like vacation. It could be things like you want to be able to pick up your kids from school, or you're picking up your kids from school 1 day a week, right? You get to choose. And it's so important that you really take this time to do this. Now, I'll go back to one of my early stories. Frankly, when I landed that big corporate deal back in Europe a long time ago, and, it was a really nice deal when I was very early on in my coaching practice, like incredibly early on. And I realized as I was negotiating that contract that I was going to be covering about 10 different countries across Europe. My kids were young at the time. I'm thinking that my youngest they were something like 5 and 10, or, 6 and 11, something like that. They still needed me. And frankly, I still wanted to be around. There was no way that I wanted to be traveling across Europe, schlepping suitcases, different time zones. Frankly, I find, traveling on my own lonely after a while, especially for business. I knew that was not what I wanted. Now, back in the day when I proposed this and there were coaching programs that were taking off inside of organizations, everybody was doing coaching in person. That's how it worked. It was almost as if the high fees were justified because, no, we come to you, we come into your office, right? We come into your boardroom. And I knew that there was a constraint there for me that, yes, I'd say yes to it. And probably 6 to 9 months in, I would be really over it. And so the constraint that I put in place was it was virtual. That's when I came up with that idea. It was thinking through the lens of constraints. I had my hours that I was available as well. And I never opened up the calendar for more, certainly in those early days before we started to grow that program. And then I had team as well that was helping to deliver it. But that most important constraint around the virtual program versus in person was probably, a huge indicator for, how I was then going to grow my business moving forwards, right? I have run a location independent business for 20 years. And that was thinking about, I'm not going to tolerate the airports, right? And all of that inconvenience. So think about what that is for you. We work with women and so many visions look different, right? Of the virtual firms, the kind of blended firms, fractional team members, full-time, employees, virtual team members in the office. Of course we still have women that are like, no, I love to get out of the house. I don't want to run the virtual firm. I really want to have a paralegal or an associate, at desks, because I want the conference room where we can do our case management meetings, right? But again, there is a right way to build this. Like, there's no model for the perfect firm is what I was wanting to say. But the right way to build it is the way that is aligned for you. And as you start to go through that, you'll start to see that, doubt comes up. Can I really do this? Will clients accept working this way, right? We start to impose a lot of our own limitations, our own faulty thinking when we're visioning. And I can promise you, just let those thoughts kind of pass, acknowledge that they're there. They're there probably to try and slow you down a little bit, and they're going to come up because you're going to be building something that's new and distinct. But start to even look for examples. Who else has done it, right? Who else do you know? Start to look at all the different business models out there and use that for inspiration. But I cannot say enough, and this is kind of like the warning, right? And that's why I say sometimes you've got to either reset, redesign, build up again. If you don't go through this process or a process of redesign, you will be building your firm by default. And building it by default honestly looks messy. That's when you find yourself, again, not with the firm that, the firm's running you ragged, frankly. You're not running it. You haven't got the clients. You're, all over the place. Your time is no longer yours. Your energy doesn't seem to be yours anymore. And you've built something by default. We see this happening time and time again. And it's so worth taking the time, creating the space for that, going through your tolerations, looking at your constraints. What do you really want to be building around? And then getting into vision. So as always, superstars, love having you with me on this journey. Please like, comment, or share below. I'd love to hear what's resonating for you. And I can't wait to catch you on the next episode.